On a quiet stretch of coastline, where the sea meets the sky in endless blue, there stood a lighthouse unlike any other. It wasn't the tallest lighthouse, nor was it painted in the boldest colors. In fact, to most people passing by, it looked quite ordinary whitewashed stone weathered by decades of salt air. A red roof that had faded to the color of autumn leaves, and windows that caught the light just so. But this lighthouse had a secret that only the stars knew about. Every night, when the last fishing boat had returned to harbor and the coastal town had settled into peaceful slumber, something magical would happen. As the lighthouse beam swept across the dark waters in its steady, comforting rhythm, it would begin to whisper. Not loudly, not urgently, but in the softest voice imaginable, a voice that traveled up into the star-filled sky. The lighthouse keeper who lived there was named Eleanor. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair that she wore in a practical bun and eyes the color of sea glass. Eleanor had been tending this lighthouse for nearly 30 years, ever since she was a young woman seeking a quiet life by the sea. She knew every stone of the lighthouse walls, every creak of the wooden stairs that spiraled up to the beacon room, and every mood of the ocean that stretched endlessly before her windows. But Eleanor didn't know about the whispers. How could she? The lighthouse only spoke when she was fast asleep in her small bedroom on the second floor, dreaming of gentle waves and seabirds soaring on ocean breezes. The whispers had begun many years ago, though no one could say exactly when. Perhaps they started the first night a ship found safety in a storm because of the lighthouse's beam. Perhaps they began when a lost whale followed the light back to deeper waters. Or maybe they started the night Eleanor first climbed the stairs and lit the beacon with her own hands, filling the lighthouse with such care and purpose that it simply had to share its joy with someone. And who better to share with than the stars? Each night, as the beacon turned and cast its warm light across the water, the lighthouse would look up at the vast tapestry of stars scattered across the darkness. There was Polaris, the North Star, steady and true. There were the friendly clusters of the Pleiades, twinkling like diamonds on velvet. There was Orion, standing guard over the winter sky, and Cassiopeia, sitting regally in her celestial chair. "Good evening, my friends," the lighthouse would whisper, its voice carried on the sea breeze. "How are you tonight?" And remarkably, wonderfully, the stars would whisper back. Their voices were like the tinkling of wind chimes, like the soft rustle of leaves, like the gentle lapping of waves on a quiet shore. Each star had its own voice, its own story, its own reason for shining in the darkness. Polaris, being the eldest and wisest, often spoke first. "We are well, dear lighthouse," the North Star would say in a voice like distant thunder rolling across a calm sea. "We have been watching over the travelers and the dreamers, as always. And you? How goes your watch tonight?" The lighthouse beam would pause in its rotation, as if taking a moment to consider. "All is peaceful here," it would reply. 3 ships passed safely in the evening, guided by our light. The fishing boats are secure in the harbor. And Eleanor is sleeping soundly. I can hear her gentle breathing through the bedroom window." This was how their conversations always began, with a sharing of the night's observations. But as the hours passed and the night deepened, the whispers would turn to stories. The stars, you see, had been witnesses to countless wonders. They had watched over ancient mariners navigating by their light, seen civilizations rise and fall, observed the great migrations of whales and birds. They had stories spanning millions of years, tales of courage and kindness, of love and loss, of the endless dance between earth and sky and sea. "Tell me," the lighthouse would whisper on this particular night, a gentle spring evening when the air was soft and filled with the scent of blooming coastal flowers, "tell me about the great storms you have seen." Vega, a bright star in the constellation Lyra, sparkled a bit more brightly. "Oh, my dear lighthouse," she said in a voice like silver bells, "I have seen storms that would make the bravest souls tremble. Hurricanes that stirred the ocean into towering walls of water, blizzards that turned the world white as far as the eye could see. But," added Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, his voice warm and steady, "I have also seen how these storms bring renewal. The rain that falls feeds the earth and fills the rivers. The winds that blow carry seeds to new places where flowers will bloom. The snow that covers the ground protects the sleeping plants until spring returns." The lighthouse considered this wisdom, its beam continuing its faithful sweep across the calm waters. Yes, it whispered thoughtfully. I have guided many ships through storms. It is frightening work when the waves are high and the wind howls. But there is such joy when the storm passes and the ship finds safe harbor. The relief in the captain's eyes, the gratitude of the passengers, it makes every difficult night worthwhile. This was the way of their conversations, always finding the light within the darkness, the hope within the challenge. The stars and the lighthouse understood something that perhaps only those who spend their lives watching over others can understand, that even in the most difficult times, there is purpose and meaning to be found. As the night continued, other stars joined the conversation. Capella, twinkling in the constellation Auriga, shared stories of the shepherds and farmers who had relied on the stars for guidance through the centuries. Betelgeuse, the great red giant in Orion's shoulder, spoke in a voice like distant music about the sailors who had sung sea shanties while navigating by the constellations. The lighthouse listened to each story with wonder, storing them away like treasures. In return, it shared its own tales, stories of the ships it had guided to safety, of the whales that sometimes surfaced near the shore on quiet evenings, of Eleanor and her dedication to keeping the light burning bright. She is a remarkable woman, our Eleanor, the lighthouse whispered one night. Do you see how she climbs the stairs to the beacon room? Even when her knees ache. How she polishes the lens until it shines like crystal. How she watches the weather and adjusts our light for the fog and the rain. We see, replied the stars in unison, their voices creating a harmony like the most beautiful choir. We see her kindness, how she waves to the fishing boats each morning, how she tends her small garden. Even though the salt air makes it difficult for flowers to grow. We see how she never complains about the loneliness, though she must sometimes wish for company. The lighthouse's beam dimmed slightly, as if it were sighing. Yes, she is often alone. The nearest town is 5 miles down the coast road. Visitors come only occasionally, usually officials checking on the lighthouse, or tourists taking photographs. I wish I could let her know that she is not truly alone, that we are here, that we see and appreciate everything she does. This conversation troubled the lighthouse greatly. Night after night, it thought about Eleanor's solitude. The stars tried to comfort their friend, reminding the lighthouse of all the lives Eleanor's work had touched, all the ships guided safely home because of her dedication. But the lighthouse continued to worry. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late autumn, and Eleanor had come down with a fever. She was not a woman to complain or to ask for help easily, but she had been feeling poorly for several days. On this particular night, she found it difficult to climb the steep stairs to light the beacon. Her head ached, her body felt weak, and she was dizzy from the fever. But Eleanor was devoted to her duty. Even feeling as ill as she did, she forced herself up the spiral stairs, step by careful step, pausing often to catch her breath. The lighthouse felt her struggle and wished desperately that it could light itself, that it could spare her this difficult climb. When Eleanor finally reached the beacon room, she was exhausted. Her hands shook as she lit the great lamp, and she had to grip the railing tightly to keep from swaying. She managed to start the rotation mechanism that would turn the beacon through the night, but as she prepared to descend the stairs, her fever spiked suddenly. Eleanor sat heavily on the small chair she kept in the beacon room, putting her head in her hands. She felt so ill, so tired, and so very alone. For the first time in all her years as lighthouse keeper, she wondered if she had the strength to continue. The lighthouse felt Eleanor's distress as surely as it felt the wind and the rain. Its beam began to turn, sending out its faithful signal across the dark water, but its heart, if lighthouses can be said to have hearts, was heavy with concern. Dear friends, the lighthouse whispered urgently to the stars as soon as Eleanor had managed to make her way back down to her bedroom. Our Eleanor is very ill. She is suffering, and she feels so alone. Is there nothing we can do? The stars conferred among themselves in voices too soft for even the lighthouse to hear clearly. Finally, Polaris spoke, his ancient voice filled with gentle authority. There is something we have never done before, the North Star said slowly. Something that goes against our usual way. We shine our light down to earth, yes, but we have never tried to send our voices where humans could hear them. It would take all of us working together, and even then, we cannot be sure it would work. Please, whispered the lighthouse, its beam sweeping across the water with unusual urgency. Please try. Eleanor has given so much of herself to help others find their way safely. Surely she deserves to know that her kindness has been seen, that her work matters, that she is not alone. And so, for the first time in cosmic history, the stars decided to break their silence. It began softly, so softly that it might have been mistaken for the sound of wind in the eaves or waves lapping gently at the shore. But gradually, the sound grew clearer. It was singing the most beautiful, ethereal singing imaginable, like voices of angels or the music of the spheres that ancient philosophers had dreamed about. Eleanor, tossing fitfully in her fever, at first thought she was dreaming. But the singing continued, growing more distinct. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the sky above and the sea below, from the very air around her. Slowly, still weak from her fever, Eleanor rose from her bed. She wrapped her heaviest shawl around her shoulders and made her way to her bedroom window. And there, in the clear autumn night, she saw something extraordinary. The stars were dancing, not in the way stars sometimes seem to twinkle and shift because of atmospheric conditions, but truly. Dancing, moving in slow, graceful patterns across the sky, their light pulsing in time with the ethereal music that filled the night air. Eleanor sank into the chair beside her window, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. She was not a fanciful woman, not given to seeing things that weren't there. But this was undeniably real. The stars were dancing for her, singing to her, letting her know in the most beautiful way possible that she was seen, she was valued, she was not alone. As she watched and listened, Eleanor felt her fever beginning to break. The music seemed to flow through her, healing and comforting. The dancing lights above filled her with a peace she had never experienced before. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, her voice hoarse from illness but filled with wonder. "Thank you for this gift." And though the stars did not usually speak directly to humans, on this magical night, their voices came through clearly. "Thank you, dear Eleanor, for your faithful service. Thank you for keeping the light burning bright, for guiding so many safely home. You are seen, you are appreciated, and you are never, ever alone." Eleanor sat by her window until dawn, listening to the star song and watching the cosmic dance above. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the approach of sunrise, the music gradually faded and the stars resumed their usual places. But the peace they had given her remained. In the days that followed, Eleanor recovered completely from her illness. But more than that, she was transformed. Where once she had felt isolated and sometimes wondered if her work truly mattered, now she knew with absolute certainty that she was part of something larger, something beautiful and interconnected. The lighthouse noticed the change in Eleanor immediately. She climbed the stairs with a lighter step. She hummed as she cleaned the lens and trimmed the wick. She stood longer at her windows, looking up at the night sky with a smile of recognition and gratitude. "She knows," the lighthouse whispered to the stars with joy. "She knows she is not alone." "Yes," replied the stars, their voices warm with satisfaction. "And now you know something too, dear lighthouse. You are not just a beacon for ships at sea. You are a bridge between earth and sky, between the human world and the cosmic dance. Through your caring for Eleanor, through your love for those you guide to safety, you have become part of the great web that connects all things." From that night forward, the conversations between the lighthouse and the stars took on a different quality. They still shared stories and observations, still offered comfort and wisdom to each other. But now there was an understanding that their whispers were part of something even more profound, a reminder that no one who serves others with love and dedication is ever truly alone. Eleanor continued as lighthouse keeper for many more years. She never again experienced anything quite like that magical night when the stars sang and danced for her, but she didn't need to. The memory of it lived in her heart, warming her through the longest winter nights and the stormiest weather. And sometimes, on particularly clear evenings, Eleanor would stand in her garden or on the lighthouse gallery and speak aloud to the stars, telling them about her day, sharing her thoughts and observations. She never heard them reply in words, but she could feel their presence, their gentle attention, their enduring friendship. The lighthouse continued its nightly conversations with the stars, but now with even greater purpose. It had learned that love expressed, even love whispered so softly that only the stars can hear, has the power to create magic, to heal loneliness, to transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. Years passed. Eleanor aged gracefully, her silver hair turning white, her movements becoming more careful but no less determined. The lighthouse watched over her protectively, and the stars blessed her with clear nights when her joints ached and gentle breezes when the weather was fine. Eventually, the time came for Eleanor to retire. A young man named Thomas was assigned to take her place, and Eleanor spent several weeks training him in all the duties of lighthouse keeping. She showed him how to maintain the beacon, how to read the weather signs, how to keep detailed logs of ships passing in weather conditions. But she couldn't teach him about the whispers. On Eleanor's last night as lighthouse keeper, she stood for a long time in the beacon room. Her hand resting gently on the great lens she had polished so many times. The lighthouse beam swept faithfully across the water, just as it had for all the years of her service. "Take care of him," Eleanor whispered to the lighthouse, though she didn't expect an answer. "Take care of Thomas, and help him find the same joy in this work that I have found." If Eleanor had been listening very carefully, she might have heard the softest whisper in reply, "We will, dear Eleanor. We will." Eleanor moved to a small cottage in the coastal town 5 miles down the road. She could still see the lighthouse beam from her new home, and on clear nights, she would sit by her window and watch its faithful rotation with deep satisfaction. Thomas proved to be a dedicated lighthouse keeper, though quite different from Eleanor. He was young and energetic, full of questions about navigation and weather patterns. He installed a radio in the lighthouse and sometimes listened to music or news programs while he worked. The lighthouse wasn't sure what to make of this change at first. Where Eleanor had worked in contemplative quiet, Thomas filled the space with sound and activity. But gradually, the lighthouse came to appreciate Thomas's enthusiasm and curiosity. The young man clearly loved the sea and felt honored to serve as guardian of this important beacon. The first time the lighthouse whispered to the stars with Thomas asleep in the bedroom below, the conversation was a bit uncertain. "Will he be all right, do you think?" the lighthouse asked. "He's so young, and the responsibility is great. He has a good heart," replied Polaris. "We can see it in how gently he handles your mechanisms, how carefully he studies the weather patterns, how he waves to every passing boat just as Eleanor did. He will find his own way of serving, and it will be good." The stars were right. Thomas did find his own way. He was fascinated by the science of navigation and spent hours studying celestial charts. He learned to predict weather changes by watching cloud formations and wind patterns. And he developed a deep appreciation for the stars themselves. Often standing on the gallery with a small telescope, mapping constellations and tracking the movement of planets. One night, about a year after Thomas had taken over the lighthouse, something wonderful happened. The young man was outside on the gallery, using his telescope to observe Jupiter's moons, when he paused and set down his instrument. "I wonder," he said aloud, looking up at the star-filled sky, "I wonder if you know how grateful I am to be here. I've never felt more at home anywhere in my life." The lighthouse heard these words and felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with the beacon above. "He's beginning to understand," the lighthouse whispered to the stars. "He's beginning to feel what Eleanor felt, the connection, the purpose, the joy of serving others." "Yes," agreed Vega, her voice like silver music. "And perhaps, in time, he will learn to hear us too. Love opens many doors, including the door between worlds." Whether Thomas ever learned to hear the stars directly, no one could say for certain. But as the years passed, his connection to the lighthouse and the sea and the night sky deepened. He would sometimes pause in his duties and look up, as if listening to something just beyond the range of human hearing. He began to time his activities to the rhythm of the stars, noting which constellations rose at which hours, planning his most important maintenance work for the clearest, calmest nights. And the lighthouse noticed that Thomas had developed a habit of speaking aloud during his work, not to a radio or telephone, but simply speaking his thoughts to the night air, as if he knew someone was listening. "The weather's been so clear this week," he might say while polishing the lens. "Perfect for the fishing boats to get out to the deep water. I saw 3 shooting stars last night. Amazing how they can travel so far through space." These one-sided conversations delighted the lighthouse. Even if Thomas couldn't hear the whispered replies, he was participating in the ancient dialogue between earth and sky, between those who serve and those who watch over them. Years flowed by like tides, each season bringing its own rhythm and beauty. The lighthouse continued its nightly vigil, its beam sweeping faithfully across the waters. The stars continued their celestial dance, marking time in their patient way. And always, always, the whispers continued. The conversations between the lighthouse and the stars evolved over time. They spoke of changes in the shipping lanes as technology advanced, of new types of vessels that appeared in the waters, of the gradual shift in climate that brought different weather patterns. They shared observations about the wildlife, the whales that migrated past the coast, the seabirds that nested on the rocky shores, the dolphins that sometimes played in the lighthouse beam's reflection on the water. But always, their conversations returned to the humans in their care. Thomas married a kind woman named Sarah, who moved to the lighthouse and embraced the isolated but beautiful life. She planted a more ambitious garden than Eleanor had ever attempted, somehow coaxing herbs and hardy flowers to thrive in the salt air. She learned to assist with the lighthouse duties and proved to have an intuitive understanding of weather patterns. Sarah brought a new dimension to the lighthouse's existence. She was an artist who painted seascapes and star-filled skies, and she had a gift for seeing beauty in the smallest details, the way morning light struck the water, the patterns frost made on the windows, the infinite variations in the colors of sunset. She sees the world the way we do, the lighthouse whispered to the stars one night, watching Sarah work on a painting by lamplight in the room below. She sees the connections, the patterns, the hidden beauty that others might miss. Yes, agreed the stars in harmony. She has the artist's eye, which is really the eye of love, the ability to look deeply and see truly. Sarah's presence also brought something unexpected: children. First one, then two, then three little ones who filled the lighthouse with laughter and questions and the particular magic that children bring to any space. The lighthouse had never experienced anything like it. Where once the building had been filled with the quiet focus of adult keepers going about their duties, now there were small feet running up and down the spiral stairs. Young voices asking endless questions about how the beacon worked and why ships needed guidance and whether the stars had names. Are there really people living on those stars? 5-year-old Emma asked her father one evening as they stood on the gallery together. Thomas chuckled and pointed to different constellations. No, sweetheart, the stars are too hot for people like us to live on. But some of those stars have planets around them, and maybe, just maybe, there are other kinds of people on those planets, looking up at their stars and wondering the same thing you're wondering. The lighthouse listened to these conversations with fascination. Through the children's questions and Thomas's patient answers, it learned new ways to think about the cosmos, new ways to appreciate the mystery and wonder of existence. And the children brought something else wonderful: they believed in magic. 7-year-old Michael was convinced that the lighthouse beam could send messages to ships in a secret code. 4-year-old Sophie insisted that the stars spelled out stories if you looked at them just right. And Emma, the middle child, had a theory that the lighthouse itself was alive and could understand everything that happened around it. I think it likes us, Emma announced one day, patting the stone wall with her small hand. I think it's happy we're here. If only she knew how right she was. The lighthouse found that having children in residence changed the nature of its whispered conversations with the stars. Where once the discussions had been philosophical and contemplative, now they were often filled with delight and wonder at the fresh perspectives the children brought. Little Emma asked me today why the lighthouse light goes around in circles, Thomas mentioned to Sarah over dinner. Not knowing that the lighthouse was listening to every word. When I explained about ships needing to see the light from all directions, she nodded very seriously and said, "Oh, so it's like the lighthouse is giving everyone a turn for a hug." I thought that was the most perfect description I've ever heard. The lighthouse felt a warmth spread through its entire structure. A hug. Yes, that was exactly what the rotating beam was like, reaching out in all directions to embrace anyone who needed guidance or comfort. The children understand things that adults sometimes forget, the lighthouse whispered to the stars that night. They see the heart of things, the love behind the duty. Children are closer to the source of wonder, replied Antares, the great red star in Scorpius. They haven't yet learned to think that magic is impossible, so they can see magic everywhere. As if to prove this point, something remarkable happened the following week. Little Sophie, who was just learning to talk in full sentences, was playing quietly in the beacon room while her father performed routine maintenance on the lens assembly. She was having an elaborate tea party with her stuffed animals, chattering away in the way small children do. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Lighthouse?" she asked, holding up a tiny plastic cup toward the great lens. Then she paused, as if listening to a reply that no one else could hear. "Oh, you're welcome. Yes, the stars are very pretty tonight. Do you think they're having tea parties too?" Thomas, who had been focused on his work, looked up at his daughter with amusement. "Are you talking to the lighthouse, Sophie?" Sophie nodded matter-of-factly. "He likes tea parties, but he can't drink because he doesn't have a mouth. But he says thank you anyway, and he says the stars are his friends." For a moment, Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. His daughter spoke with such certainty, such casual acceptance of the impossible. He looked around the beacon room at the faithful lens he tended each day, at the walls that had stood guardian over the sea for decades. At the windows that looked out on the infinite star-filled sky. "Sophie," he said gently, "what else does the lighthouse tell you?" "Oh, lots of things," Sophie said, returning to her tea party. "He says he's very old and he remembers lots of boats. And he says the stars sing songs, but they're very quiet songs. And he says he loves us all very much." That night, after Sophie was fast asleep, Thomas stood for a long time in the beacon room, looking out at the stars. He didn't speak aloud, but his thoughts were clear and wondering. Could it be possible? Could his daughter be hearing something that adult ears couldn't detect? The lighthouse felt Thomas's new awareness like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not full understanding, perhaps, but openness to mystery, willingness to believe in connections beyond the merely physical. "She's opened a door," the lighthouse whispered to the stars with joy. "Little Sophie has opened a door in her father's mind. He's beginning to sense the truth. Children often serve as bridges," observed Sirius, his bright voice warm with approval. "They have not yet learned to close their hearts to wonder. Through them, adults can sometimes remember what they once knew." And indeed, Thomas began to pay attention to things he might have dismissed before. He noticed that the lighthouse beam seemed to pulse more gently when the children were sleeping. He observed that birds often perched on the lighthouse gallery at specific times, as if drawn by something more than mere convenience. He found himself speaking aloud more often while he worked, sharing his thoughts and observations with what he gradually came to think of as the lighthouse's presence. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and tides, by the children's growth. And the family's deepening roots in this place between sea and sky. Thomas became not just a skilled lighthouse keeper but a devoted guardian of this beacon and all it represented. Sarah's paintings of the lighthouse and the surrounding seascape began to attract attention from art collectors, bringing visitors who marveled at her ability to capture something transcendent in her work. "She paints the soul of this place," one visitor commented, studying a canvas that showed the lighthouse beam stretching up toward a sky full of dancing stars. Sarah smiled, not knowing quite how to explain that sometimes, when she painted at night, she felt as if the stars themselves were guiding her brush, helping her see and capture their eternal dance. The children grew, as children do. Emma developed a passion for astronomy and spent hours with her father's telescope, mapping stars and tracking planets. Michael became fascinated with the sea itself, learning to read currents and weather patterns, dreaming of becoming a marine biologist. Sophie, who had never lost her certainty that the lighthouse was alive and aware, began writing stories about magical beacons that watched over not just ships but dreams themselves. One evening in late spring, when Emma was 15, Michael 13, and Sophie 11, something special happened. The family had been sitting together on the lighthouse gallery, enjoying the mild evening air and the spectacular display of stars overhead. The Milky Way was particularly brilliant that night, stretching across the sky like a river of light. "Dad," Emma said suddenly, "do you ever feel like the stars are trying to tell us something?" Thomas looked up from the navigation chart he'd been studying. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma struggled to put her feelings into words. "I don't know, exactly. It's just that sometimes when I'm looking through the telescope, or when I'm out here on really clear nights like this, I get the feeling that there's a conversation going on. Like the stars and the lighthouse are talking to each other." Michael nodded enthusiastically. "I know what Emma means. Sometimes when I'm watching the beacon turn, it seems like it's following a rhythm that matches the way the stars twinkle. Sophie, now old enough to feel shy about her childhood certainties, but still sure of what she'd experienced, added quietly, "I used to think I could hear them whispering." Sarah set down the book she'd been reading and looked at her family with new attention. "You all feel this?" They nodded, each looking a bit surprised to discover that the others shared their sense of something magical happening around them. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, remembering all the times over the years when he'd felt on the verge of understanding something just beyond his grasp. Finally, he spoke. "Your mother and I have both felt it too," he said. "There's something special about this place, something that goes beyond just the lighthouse's function as a navigational aid. I think we're part of something larger here, something that connects the earth and sea and sky in ways we don't fully understand." The lighthouse, listening to this conversation, felt a joy so profound that its beam seemed to pulse with extra warmth. The stars, looking down on this family gathered together in wonder and openness, sent down their gentlest light. "They're ready," the lighthouse whispered to the stars. "After all these years, they're ready to know the truth." "Yes," agreed Polaris, his ancient voice filled with satisfaction. "They have learned to love this place not just as a home but as a sacred trust. They have opened their hearts to mystery. They are ready to become full participants in our nightly conversation." And so, for the second time in the lighthouse's long existence, the stars decided to make their presence known to human ears. It began, as it had with Eleanor years before, with the softest possible sound like wind in tall grass, like waves whispering to the shore. But this time, instead of one person listening, there were 5. Emma heard it first, her astronomer's ear attuned to the subtle rhythms of the cosmos. "Do you hear that?" she breathed, turning her head to track the sound. Then Michael caught it, his musician's training helping him identify the harmonic structure of the ethereal voices. "It's singing," he said in wonder. "The stars are singing." Sophie smiled, remembering her childhood conversations. "They're saying hello." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as the beauty of the star song washed over her. As an artist, she had always been sensitive to beauty, but this was beyond anything she had ever experienced. And Thomas, the lighthouse keeper who had devoted his life to guiding others safely home, finally heard what the lighthouse had been hearing all along, the ancient chorus of celestial voices, sharing their wisdom and wonder with all who were willing to listen. The star song continued for hours that night, welcoming the family into the cosmic conversation that had been going on around them all their lives. The voices spoke of the great patterns that connect all things, of the responsibility and joy of service, of the eternal dance between light and darkness, between guidance and discovery. When the song finally faded with the approach of dawn, the family sat in profound silence, each processing the miraculous experience in their own way. "Will we hear them again?" Sophie asked, her young voice filled with hope. "I think," said Thomas, "that now that we know how to listen, we'll hear them whenever we need to. They've been here all along, waiting for us to be ready." From that night forward, the lighthouse was no longer alone in its conversations with the stars. The entire family became part of the dialogue, each contributing their own unique perspective and understanding. Emma brought her scientific knowledge of astronomy, helping to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. Michael's sensitivity to music and rhythm added a new dimension to the star songs. Sophie's poetic imagination opened up new ways of interpreting the cosmic messages. Sarah's artistic vision helped them all see the visual beauty that accompanied the auditory wonder. And Thomas's steady devotion to service provided the foundation of purpose that made all their conversations meaningful. The whispers between the lighthouse and the stars had grown into a symphony. A family chorus that rose each night to join the eternal conversation between earth and sky. Years continued to pass, and the family's connection to their celestial friends only deepened. Emma went on to study astrophysics, but she always came home to the lighthouse during breaks from university, eager to share her new knowledge with the stars who had first inspired her love of the cosmos. Michael became a professional musician, composing pieces inspired by the star songs he had heard throughout his childhood. Sophie grew into a renowned poet whose work captured the mystery and beauty of the connection between human hearts and the infinite sky. When Thomas and Sarah grew old, Emma returned permanently to take over as lighthouse keeper, bringing her own husband and children to continue the tradition. The lighthouse watched with deep satisfaction as a new generation of children learned to climb the spiral stairs, to help tend the beacon, and eventually to hear the whispered conversations that connected their small outpost to the vast universe beyond. And through all the years, through all the changes, the lighthouse continued its faithful duty. Its beam swept across the waters night after night, guiding ships safely home, providing comfort and direction to all who needed it. But now it knew with absolute certainty that its light reached much further than the physical horizon. The lighthouse's beam had become a bridge between worlds, a connection point where earth and sky touched, where human hearts opened to cosmic wonder, where the ancient conversation between light and darkness, service and discovery, loneliness and connection continued in whispered voices that only love could hear. On quiet nights, when the sea was calm and the sky was clear, travelers passing along the distant coast road might pause and listen, sensing something magical in the air around the lighthouse. They couldn't quite identify what they heard. Perhaps it was just the wind, or the waves, or the distant call of seabirds. But some of them would drive away with a strange comfort in their hearts. A sense that somewhere in the world, faithful guardians were keeping watch, guiding light was shining in the darkness, and ancient conversations were continuing that connected all things in love. The lighthouse that whispered to the stars had become exactly what it was always meant to be, not just a beacon for ships at sea, but a reminder that no act of service goes unseen, no faithful heart goes unheard, and no light shines alone in the darkness. In the great cosmic conversation between earth and sky, between the human and the divine, between the temporary and the eternal, the lighthouse had found its voice. And in finding its voice, it had helped others find theirs as well. And so the whispers continue still, night after night, a gentle reminder that we are all connected in the great dance of existence. All part of the same vast and loving universe that speaks to those who know how to listen, that guides those who serve others, and that fills the darkness with more light and love than we ever dared to imagine. The lighthouse beam turns, the stars shine down, and the conversation continues, a gentle, eternal dialogue that reminds us all that in this vast universe, no one who serves with love is ever truly alone. And now, as you prepare to rest, imagine yourself standing on that lighthouse gallery, feeling the gentle sea breeze, looking up at the star-filled sky. Listen carefully, and you might just hear the softest whisper of cosmic voices welcoming you into the great conversation, reminding you that you too are part of something beautiful and eternal. The lighthouse beam sweeps across the calm waters one more time, the stars twinkle their ancient blessing, and all is well in the world. Rest now, knowing that somewhere, faithful guardians are keeping watch, and the light will always shine through the darkness. Sleep peacefully, dear listener. The stars are singing you a lullaby, and the lighthouse whispers that you are loved, you are seen, and you are never, ever alone.